Night is falling over the Atlantic. The air feels heavy, the ocean restless, like something alive beneath the waves. Through the radio, only static breaks the silence, and in between, fragments of a desperate voice. Both my compasses are out. I don't know where we are. The ocean doesn't look right. Imagine a Navy pilot, trained to stay calm no matter what, but his voice now carries fear. Behind him, 5 torpedo bombers, TBM Avengers, hold formation, waiting for orders, yet the very leader they trust is lost in confusion. Static surges again, sometimes a broken direction, sometimes complete silence. Darkness spreads across the sea, storm clouds gathering, thunder rolling like distant cannon fire. Rain lashes down, not just water but a warning. Nature itself seems to be closing in. Each pilot feels the thin line between survival and disappearance. Every second in that cockpit, goggles fogging, fuel needles dropping lower, nerves fraying with every burst of static. Then comes another voice across the crackling channel, strained but still trying to lead. We can't tell where the land is. Everything looks strange, even the ocean. These words, not just confusion, but a riddle that would haunt history. Commander Taylor tries to regain control. Voice steadier, almost resigned. We'll fly north, then east. If we don't find land, we'll ditch together. Picture it, 6 planes cutting through storm-black skies. Pilots clutching the controls, every heartbeat louder than the engines. The ocean beneath them stretching endless and merciless, and then nothing. No more signals. No coordinates, just silence swallowed by the Atlantic night. A squadron of U.S. Navy pilots trained, disciplined, armed with the best technology of their era simply vanished. Not a single trace left behind. This was no ordinary accident. It was the opening chapter of America's greatest aerial mystery, the legend of Flight 19, forever bound to the Bermuda Triangle. *, December 5, 1945. Naval Air Station, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The morning begins like any other. Bright skies, steady winds. The Atlantic shimmering with a deceptive calm. No one on base has the slightest idea that this day will carve itself into history. 5 TBM Avenger bombers sit ready on the tarmac, their engines rumbling with power. These are tough machines, built for war. Thick steel bodies capable of carrying heavy torpedoes, designed to withstand enemy fire. But today, they carry no weapons. This is only supposed to be a routine training mission. The men assigned to Flight 19 climb into their planes, adjusting goggles, checking instruments, exchanging casual words with each other. For them, it's just another drill, a navigation exercise over the ocean, nothing more. They've done it countless times. They believe they'll be back by sunset. Leading them is Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, a decorated combat veteran. He's logged hundreds of hours in the air. His presence gives the younger pilots confidence. If anyone knows the way, it's Taylor. But inside, Taylor carries shadows, fatigue, personal troubles, scars of war. None of the men following him can sense it. At 2:10 p.m. the squadron takes off. Engines roar in unison as the planes rise from the runway, cutting through the clear sky. On the ground, controllers mark their departure in routine logs, expecting them to return in just a few hours. The plan is simple. Fly east into the Atlantic, practice bombing runs on a set of small islands, then turn north and west to complete a triangular route back to base. The exercise is meant to sharpen navigation skills, to ensure that even if their instruments fail, the men can guide themselves by sight and calculation. But the Atlantic has its own plans. What begins as a day of drills will unravel into a nightmare. The clear skies will darken, the compasses will betray them, and every man in Flight 19 will vanish into the Bermuda Triangle. What none of them realize as they leave Fort Lauderdale is that they will never set foot on solid ground again. *, the TBM Avenger, a beast of World War II, wide wings, 3-man crews, built to drop torpedoes into enemy waters. These machines were never meant to vanish without a trace. Yet on December 5, 1945, 5 of them lifted into the sky together, destined to become ghosts. Flight 19 wasn't just random planes thrown together. Each Avenger had its crew, young men in their early 20s, trained, disciplined, confident in the reliability of their aircraft. They trusted the steel around them, the gauges in front of them, and above all, the brotherhood of flying side by side. Their call signs marked them clearly: FT-28, FT-36, FT-81, FT-117, FT-3 to the control tower. They were just numbers on a chart, but to each other they were voices in the storm, bound together by the invisible thread of formation. Imagine the sight: 5 Avengers slicing through the Florida sky, engines thundering in rhythm, formation tight and precise. The Navy built these drills to remind pilots that no one flies alone, but that bond would soon be tested in a way no training manual could prepare them for. Inside the cockpits, the air smells of fuel and sweat, the roar of engines vibrating through the seats. Each crew member checks his panel, compass needles steady for now, radio chatter light and casual. They joke, they plan dinner after landing, they believe this is just another run. None of them can sense that this routine day is already bending toward legend. As the squadron pushes east over the endless blue, the ocean below seems calm, but the Atlantic has moods that change without warning. To the human eye, it looks eternal and unbroken. To those Avengers flying above it, it hides both trust and treachery. 5 planes, 14 men, 1 mission. Their flight paths should have been a simple triangle, but in the Bermuda Triangle, straight lines bend, compasses falter, and reality itself begins to blur. By the time the sun sets, these Avengers will no longer be aircraft on a mission. They will be questions whispered across decades. The phantom heart of the Bermuda Triangle's greatest mystery. Every legend needs a central figure, and for Flight 19, that man was Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor. Taylor wasn't some rookie plucked from training. He was a seasoned combat veteran, a man who had flown missions in both the Pacific and the Atlantic. By 1945, he had logged over 2,500 hours of flight time. To the Navy, he was considered reliable. To the young men following him that day, he was the voice of experience. But behind the medals and the uniform, Taylor was complicated. His record wasn't spotless. He had been through personal turmoil, a divorce, lingering fatigue, and a reputation for getting disoriented in navigation drills. Some officers whispered about his judgment. Yet on December 5th, he was still the one chosen to lead 5 Avengers out over the ocean. When Taylor climbed into his cockpit that afternoon, he carried the weight of command. Every man in Flight 19 would be looking to him when the skies darkened, and darken they would dot as the planes cut farther into the Atlantic. Taylor began to doubt his own instruments. Both compasses failed him, a nightmare for any pilot. He started second-guessing the position of Florida, convinced they were over the Florida Keys when in reality they were drifting much farther east. His uncertainty bled into his transmissions, his once steady tone cracking with unease. The men behind him trusted him anyway. That's what soldiers do, they follow their leader, even into the unknown. But with Taylor at the helm, Flight 19 wasn't just fighting weather, it was fighting the human shadow of doubt. The irony is chilling. A man decorated for bravery, trusted to guide others, becomes the very symbol of disorientation. His voice, captured in fragments of radio static, would be the last tether to those 14 lives. History would later argue, was Taylor a victim of magnetic anomaly, a prisoner of faulty instruments, or simply a man overwhelmed in the wrong place at the wrong time? Whatever the truth, on that day, Charles Taylor wasn't just a leader. He became the tragic figurehead of America's most enduring aerial mystery. At first, the sky is calm. Florida sunlight glints across the wings of the Avengers as they push east, engines humming steady. For a moment it feels like the exercise will be as routine as planned. But the Atlantic doesn't play fair for long. Clouds begin to gather on the horizon, slow at first, then rolling in with unnerving speed. The ocean below shifts color, from bright turquoise to steel gray, as if the sea itself senses what is coming. Pilots glance at their gauges, then at the sky, aware of how quickly weather over these waters can betray them. The shift is sudden, almost unnatural. Clear skies dissolve into haze. Visibility drops. Compass needles twitch. The young pilots in the trailing planes tighten their grips on the controls. They can still hear Taylor's voice through the crackling radio, but even his tone carries tension now. Rain spits against the cockpit glass. Lightning forks across the distance. Each flash lights the ocean like a battlefield. The Avengers push deeper into the storm, wings cutting through turbulence, engines straining against the wind. To the men inside, it feels as if the world is closing in. The Atlantic sky offers no landmarks, no horizon to guide them, just endless gray, above and below, without clear sight lines. Disorientation creeps in, the same deadly force that has claimed countless pilots before. The exercise is unraveling. What was meant to be a simple triangle route now feels like a labyrinth drawn by nature itself. One by one, the pilots begin to question their bearings. Where is Florida? Are they flying east, or already drifting too far west? That storm has done its work. It has stripped away the illusion of control. Instruments falter, visibility vanishes, and faith in the sky begins to crumble. Visibility vanishes, and faith in the sky begins to crumble. This is no longer a training mission. This is the beginning of Flight 19's descent into chaos. A descent written not just in faulty compasses, but in the dark moods of the Bermuda Triangle itself. The storm thickens, and with it, the first cracks in Flight 19's certainty. Taylor's voice cuts through the static. Both my compasses are out. I don't know where we are. For a Navy pilot, these words are unthinkable. Compasses are lifelines when they fail. The sky becomes an endless trap. Inside each Avenger, crew members trade uneasy glances. They know the Atlantic well enough to respect its tricks. But now even their leader sounds unsure. Through the radios, fragments of back-and-forth chatter reveal panic creeping in. One pilot insists they should be over the Florida Keys. Another swears they're still far out in the Atlantic. Both can't be right. The compass needles jitter and spin, refusing to settle. The more the men look at them, the less sense they make. Without landmarks below, no coast, no islands in sight, even the ocean seems strange. One pilot reports the water doesn't look like it should, as if the sea itself has changed beneath them. Every second that passes deepens the uncertainty. Fuel gauges tick downward. The clock is no longer on their side. And still, Taylor struggles to make a call. His training tells him to lead with authority. His gut tells him the maps in his head are failing him. Static interrupts again, his voice breaking. We must have gotten lost after the last turn. We're not sure which way is west. Everything looks wrong. It's the kind of confusion that spreads like fire. Once the leader admits doubt, it infects the formation. Confidence unravels. Doubt becomes the enemy. The 5 Avengers keep circling, searching the horizon for a glimpse of land that never appears. Above them, thunder cracks. Below them, waves rise higher. Around them, the Bermuda Triangle tightens its grip. This is the moment Flight 19 shifts from a routine drill into legend. What began as a simple exercise has transformed into a riddle written in storm clouds and static, and the voices echoing across the radio are no longer calm instructions. They are the first whispers of men realizing they may never see land again. Asterisk, asterisk. The radios crackle like broken bones in the storm. Words flicker in and out, sentences sliced apart by static. Each Avenger is still airborne, but their only tether to each other now is a thread of broken voices. Taylor's transmissions are scattered, confused. We don't know which way is west. Everything looks strange. Another pilot cuts in, sharper, trying to hold the formation together. If we just head west, we'll get home. But Taylor overrules him. His voice carries authority, but also doubt. If we go west, we'll end up in the Gulf. We must be over the Keys. The arguments spill across the airwaves. Young men who should never question command are now debating their leader in mid. The desperation is clear in their tone. They don't want to disobey, but they know every wrong decision burns fuel they cannot spare. The control tower in Fort Lauderdale listens in, alarm rising. Operators try to reach the squadron, guiding them back with clear instructions. But the storm twists the signals, their words mangled by interference. Sometimes the men hear nothing. Sometimes they hear too much. Different orders colliding into more confusion. One pilot pleads for Taylor to make a decisive call. Another insists they see nothing but endless ocean. The voices overlap, a chorus of fear that no one can quiet. Then a chilling phrase cuts through. We can't make out anything. Not the land. Not even the ocean. The storm outside is blinding. But what's worse is the storm inside their minds. Disorientation is eating away at discipline. The voices that were once steady, trained, and professional now carry cracks of raw human panic. Every broken transmission becomes more haunting than the last. Every pause in the static feels like a silence that might never be broken again. The men of Flight 19 are still speaking, still alive, but with each passing minute, their words sound less like pilots navigating and more like lost souls calling out across the dark Atlantic. Asterisk, the ocean and the sky blur into one endless gray. No horizon, no point of reference. For a pilot, this is the deadliest illusion. Without landmarks, the human brain can't tell up from down, east from west. And inside Flight 19, that illusion is becoming reality. Taylor believes they're flying over the Florida Keys, though in truth they're drifting hundreds of miles away. His voice comes across the radio, trying to sound certain. But uncertainty seeps through. If this is the Keys, then we should turn north. Then east. One of his wingmen cuts in, his tone urgent, almost pleading, "Sir, if we just turn west, we'll make the mainland." But Taylor hesitates. His compasses spin uselessly, his mental map tangled. The squadron keeps circling, burning precious fuel. The men inside the Avengers are sweating, not just from the humidity, but from the weight of dread. Every turn feels wrong. Every direction feels like a trap. Some pilots report the sea doesn't look like it should. The waves seem higher, the water darker, almost metallic under the storm clouds. Others swear they've seen islands vanish behind the rain before they can even confirm what they are. Reality itself feels unstable. In moments like these, discipline usually anchors a squadron. But now, discipline is slipping. Doubt spreads through the formation like static through the radio. Voices rise, clash, overlap. No one knows whether to trust Taylor's orders, their own instincts, or the instruments that have betrayed them. This is the Bermuda Triangle's silent weapon, disorientation. It doesn't strike like lightning or tear metal like a storm. It erodes the mind, minute by minute, until trained pilots no longer trust their own eyes. And in that mental fog, every mile they fly carries them further from safety, deeper into mystery. By now, Flight 19 is no longer a group of confident Navy men on a drill. They are shadows chasing horizons that don't exist. 5 Avengers circling in a sky that refuses to give them a way home. Asterisk, the afternoon sun dips lower, swallowed by thickening clouds. What little light remains is fading fast, and with it, the last comfort of visibility. For Flight 19, darkness is not just the night, it is the enemy that erases every chance of survival. The cockpits grow dim. Pilots strain to read their dials under the flicker of failing light. Each man knows fuel is draining away, and night flying without working compasses is close to suicide. Yet there is no choice. They are already too far gone to turn back with certainty. Outside, the storm intensifies. Rain lashes across the canopies, streaks of water blurring what little view remains. Thunder rolls overhead, not in sharp bursts but in long rumbling growls that feel endless. Lightning illuminates the formation in ghostly flashes. 5 Avengers flickering like shadows across a battlefield sky. Taylor's voice cracks through the radio. "Keep tight formation. If we have to ditch, we'll do it together." It is meant to steady the men, but instead it sounds like resignation. Even he can hear the hopelessness behind his own words. Some of the younger pilots whisper into the radio, their voices thinner now, betraying exhaustion and fear. They are no longer confident aviators. They are men staring into a black ocean, wondering if this is the last time they will ever speak. The Atlantic below is no longer just water, it is an abyss. In the dying light, it looks infinite, featureless, and merciless. The men can't even trust the horizon. Sky and sea merge into one solid darkness. There is no line, no boundary, nothing left to hold on to. The clock pushes past 6 p.m. Fuel is critical. Every mile they fly in circles is another nail in their fate. The darkness has swallowed them whole, and still, no land comes into sight. In those final minutes of daylight, Flight 19 is transformed. They are not students on a drill, not warriors in command of machines. They are flickering shadows in a storm, swallowed by a night that will never return them. The sea was calm on the surface that December evening, but inside the radios of Flight 19, chaos was unfolding. Imagine the voice of Lieutenant Charles Taylor, steady at first, then breaking under static. "We are not sure of our position. Everything looks strange. The ocean doesn't look like it should." His words were carried across the airwaves like fragments of a dying star, fading, distorted, and swallowed by silence. Other pilots tried to respond, but their signals overlapped, tangled in bursts of static that sounded more like screams than transmissions for men trained to fly by instruments. There was no greater terror than realizing those instruments had turned against them. Compasses spun wildly as if dragged by unseen magnets. Altimeters lied about height, and navigation charts became meaningless in a sky where east and west refused to exist. They circled, desperate, but every circle led them deeper into nowhere. One pilot insisted they should turn west toward land, but Taylor, the flight leader, overruled him, convinced they were already over the Gulf of Mexico. Imagine the dread of following a commander you trusted, only to sense he was leading you into a graveyard of water. Ground stations caught fragments of their last desperate calls. "Don't follow me too far. I might be wrong. Everything is wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look right." The final words dissolved into static so sharp it could cut through bone. And then nothing. 5 Navy bombers, 14 men, erased not just from the sky, but from history itself. And here is where the abyss opens wider, because the rescue plane sent to find them, a massive PBM Mariner with 13 more crew, also vanished. No wreckage, no oil slick, no survivors. 1 disappearance is mystery, 2 is an omen. 27 men swallowed in a single night without leaving behind a single trace. The Bermuda Triangle was no longer a whisper in sailors' taverns after that night. It became a headline, a curse, a black mark on the Navy's pride. And yet, instead of answers, only silence grew louder. Witnesses were ignored, logs were altered, and entire pages of official reports vanished, as if the ocean had not only consumed the planes, but the truth itself. Asterisk in the aftermath, the Navy scrambled to explain the unexplainable. Families demanded answers, reporters circled like vultures. But the official story was a fog thicker than the storm that night. The first report claimed mechanical failure, then navigational error, then sudden fuel exhaustion. Yet each theory collapsed under its own weight, because no wreckage, no oil slick, no floating debris was ever found. The ocean should have given something back. It gave nothing. Behind closed doors, investigators whispered of distorted compasses, impossible readings, and pilots describing seas that didn't look like they should. But when the final report was published, those words were missing, edited out as if they had never been spoken. Lieutenant Taylor, the flight leader, was painted as confused, unstable, a man who lost his bearings. Convenient, isn't it? Blame the dead, silence the living, and the Navy walks away clean. But fragments survived in secret. Some radio operators swore the transmissions carried strange interference. Not ordinary static, but pulses rhythmic, patterned, almost intelligent. Others remembered a brief chilling silence, as though every channel had been swallowed at once. These details never made it into the files, and those who tried to speak louder found themselves reassigned, discredited, or simply ignored. The cover-up was not only about the lost men, it was about what they had encountered, because deep inside the classified archives, there were whispers of other flights, other ships, vanishing in the same patch of sea, long before Flight 19. Cases where compasses spun like mad clocks, where time itself seemed to bend. Some of those reports were stamped eyes only, locked away from public sight. Flight 19 was not just an accident, it was a symptom of something larger, something forbidden, a zone where the laws of navigation, and maybe the laws of reality, begin to break. And instead of confronting that truth, the Navy buried it under paperwork and silence. But silence has cracks. And through those cracks, shadows leak, stories of survivors who spoke too much, rumors of a rescue plane's last frantic flare seen by fishermen far from the official search zone, whispers that the triangle itself feeds on those who seek it. The deeper you dig, the louder the question becomes. Did the Navy lose control of its planes that night, or did it lose control of a secret it was never meant to reveal? Asterisk buried inside naval archives, among files stamped classified, are fragments that never reached the public. Faded memos from the 1930s tell of merchant ships that sent out distress calls, claiming the sea was boiling beneath them, before their signals abruptly cut off. Handwritten notes from World War II speak of pilots watching entire squadrons vanish into sudden clouds that appeared and disappeared like curtains closing on a stage. The Bermuda Triangle was not a legend built in one night. It was a pattern carved across decades, whispered by those who dared to look too closely. Researchers who later gained access to declassified files found something even stranger: the sheer consistency of these reports. Compasses spinning, radios choking with unnatural static, crews describing the sky as if it bent around them. These were not the tales of drunken sailors or superstitious fishermen. These were military men, trained, disciplined, sworn to precision, and yet their words, when recorded, carried the same haunted rhythm, like survivors of a nightmare trying to describe shadows that had no shape. After Flight 19, the Navy tightened the vault. Files disappeared, pages were cut, and entire case numbers were erased from indexes. It was as if someone wanted to make the triangle itself vanish from history. But history does not vanish. It waits, it festers, and it re-emerges when the silence can no longer contain it. By the 1950s, rumors leaked again. Commercial pilots spoke off-record about losing hours of flight time while their clocks showed only minutes. Radar operators admitted to tracking planes that simply blinked out mid-screen, leaving nothing but an empty echo. Yet each time these stories surfaced, officials drowned them with explanations: equipment malfunction, human error, tricks of light. Always the same refrain, always the same denial. But deep beneath denial lies recognition. The Navy may not have spoken openly, but in the shadows of their actions, a darker truth takes form. More patrols were assigned, yet fewer reports were released. Scientists were quietly flown into Bermuda and Florida bases, then just as quietly removed. Something was studied, something was found, and then silence again. Flight 19 was not the first disappearance, nor was it the last, but it was the turning point, the moment the mystery crossed from rumor into forbidden history. From that night forward, the triangle became less of an ocean and more of a wound the government tried to cover, but one that refused to heal. Asterisk the Bermuda Triangle is more than a patch of sea on a map. It is a fracture line where reality itself seems unstable, where human senses become unreliable and time refuses to flow in a straight line. Survivors, few and shaken, speak in tones that border on delirium. One sailor swore that his compass spun like a wheel, but when he checked his watch, hours had passed though the sun had hardly moved. Another remembered hearing his own voice on the radio before he even spoke, as if the airwaves were folding back on themselves. Psychologists who studied these testimonies noticed a chilling pattern. The men were not simply confused, they were altered. Their memories came in fragments, stitched together like dreams, laced with dread. Some described the ocean glowing faintly at night, pulsing with light that had no source. Others reported overwhelming fear, not natural fear of storms or sinking, but a pressure inside the mind, a terror that seemed planted, engineered. Was it mass hysteria, or was the triangle not only bending instruments, but consciousness itself? If the air can twist magnetic fields, what could it do to the fragile chemistry of the human brain? Imagine flying through clouds that taste of metal, or hearing whispers inside static that seem to know your name. These accounts never made it to official files, but they survived in journals, private letters, and in the trembling voices of men who could never sleep soundly again. Legends began to bleed into science. Caribbean fishermen told of windows in the sea, shimmering patches where water seemed thinner, less real. Pilots whispered about corridors of light inside storms, tunnels that lured them off course. Some believed these were natural anomalies, magnetic vortices, unknown weather systems. Others dared to suggest something darker, that the triangle was not a place at all, but a door, a threshold between worlds, a wound where the skin of our reality has torn. And once you imagine it as a door, a forbidden thought creeps in. Doors are meant to open, but they can also close, trapping those who pass through. Flight 19 may not have been lost to ocean or storm, but to a place beyond the maps, a space where compasses lie and time itself betrays you. Long before the United States Navy mapped its flight paths, long before radar and radio, sailors whispered of a cursed sea where ships vanished like breath on glass. The Spanish conquistadors recorded tales of waters that pulled galleons off course, of stars that flickered as if the heavens themselves were unstable above this ocean. Caribbean tribes told of spirits that guarded invisible gates, thresholds no human was meant to cross. To them, the triangle was not just dangerous, it was sacred, forbidden. Centuries later, scientists stumbled upon stories that seemed less like folklore and more like warnings. Reports of magnetic anomalies and gravitational distortions echoed what ancient myths had already described. Zones where the world bends, where the ordinary laws of navigation collapse. The Greeks spoke of the mares of Poseidon, whirlpools and tempests that swallowed fleets. Some historians quietly began to connect these dots, wondering if humanity had always known about the triangle, but chose to bury the knowledge under myth to keep it hidden. And then came the 20th century, when superstition gave way to science, or perhaps to something even darker. After Flight 19's disappearance, whispers spread of secret research teams dispatched not to find wreckage, but to study the ocean itself. Files hinted at electromagnetic corridors and dimensional stress zones. Navy divers, it was said, encountered glowing spheres beneath the surface, pulsing like living machines. None of these accounts were ever confirmed, but the rumors grew, and with them the suspicion that Flight 19 had not been an accident at all. What if the Navy was not simply investigating? What if they were experimenting, testing how far human technology could push against these natural or unnatural doorways? A failed test would explain why the official report seemed so desperate to paint the pilots as confused, not because the men were at fault, but because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting the military had brushed against a forbidden frontier. Ancient myth, modern secrecy, two layers of the same story. A story of doors. Doors that open into storms that never end, into seas that shimmer with light that should not exist. Doors that may have consumed Flight 19, closing behind them like a vault. The question that lingers is not whether these doors exist, it is who, across history, has known about them, and why that knowledge was never meant to be ours. The disappearance of Flight 19 did not fade into silence. It echoed into the corridors of power at the dawn of the Cold War, a time when every anomaly was a potential weapon, every secret a battlefield. To lose 5 Navy bombers and then a massive rescue plane was not just an embarrassment, it was an opportunity to ask the most dangerous question. What if the Bermuda Triangle was not just a curse, but a resource? Declassified memos from the late 1940s hint at covert research programs, masked under the language of geophysical studies and aerial navigation safety and truth. They were probing the triangle like a wound, seeking patterns in its anomalies. Some documents even suggested using the zone as a testing ground, a natural laboratory for electromagnetic warfare. After all, if compasses and radios failed so violently there, could that chaos be reproduced, directed, turned against an enemy? Rumors swirled of submarines dispatched under sealed orders, their missions never logged. Divers who returned whispered about structures on the seabed that looked less like coral and more like shattered architecture, as if ruins of something older than human history lay hidden in the deep. These stories were dismissed as sailors' tales, yet they clung to the shadows of classified files, too persistent to ignore. By the 1950s, the obsession deepened. America was locked in a struggle with the Soviet Union, and both sides were desperate for an edge. Imagine generals reading about an oceanic zone where time fractured, where machines failed, where men vanished. To the paranoid logic of the Cold War, this was not a mystery to be feared. It was a weapon to be harnessed. And so the Bermuda Triangle was quietly folded into the map of global strategy. Satellites tracked its storms, radar stations logged its anomalies, and teams of scientists were flown to bases in Florida and Bermuda under the cover of night. Officially, nothing unusual was happening. Unofficially, experiments were being conducted, and ships sailed into waters where compasses spun not to avoid danger, but to measure it. What if Flight 19 was not only a tragedy, but a catalyst? The night 27 men vanished may have been the night the triangle transformed in the eyes of the powerful from a forbidden abyss into a forbidden tool, a weapon carved not from steel but from reality itself. As the Cold War deepened, the Bermuda Triangle stopped being a sailor's nightmare and became a chessboard square in the secret war between empires. The Americans were not alone in their curiosity. Soviet intelligence had already gathered whispers of the triangle's anomalies, and by the late 1950s, KGB operatives were filing reports about zones of instability in the Atlantic. To them, these waters were not cursed, they were strategic. Don't imagine the paranoia in Washington when reconnaissance flights picked up Soviet research vessels lingering near Bermuda, deploying strange buoys and towing equipment bristling with antennas. Officially, these ships were mapping currents. Unofficially, they were probing the same invisible fractures the US Navy had been measuring for years. It was no longer a mystery, it was a race. Declassified fragments suggest that both sides feared the other had found a way to weaponize the triangle. Could its magnetic chaos be amplified into a weapon that blinded navigation? Could its distortions be used to hide submarines from sonar, turning the sea itself into camouflage? The possibilities were limitless and terrifying in the shadows. Spy games played out like ghost stories. Fishermen claimed to see unmarked submarines surfacing at night, only to vanish again without trace. Pilots whispered of strange lights zigzagging over the ocean, moving faster than any jet should. Were these experimental crafts, or were they something else entirely? Drawn to the same fractured waters both nations now stalked. Files that survived hint at joint incidents, moments where American and Soviet missions collided inside the triangle itself, neither willing to admit they were there. In one case, a Soviet sub and a US destroyer both vanished from radar for 12 full minutes, then reappeared miles apart. each convinced the other had used new technology to cloak themselves. Neither side could explain it, but both walked away more determined than ever to control the mystery. The Bermuda Triangle had become more than a forbidden zone. It was now a battlefield of silence where two superpowers probed at reality itself, desperate for an edge. Every missing ship, every vanished plane, was not only a tragedy but a warning that the Triangle did not belong to any nation, and yet both were trying to claim it. In the paranoia of the Cold War, the Forbidden Sea was no longer just swallowing men, it was swallowing the truth. The deeper you listen to the reports, the more the Triangle begins to sound less like an ocean, and more like a living riddle. Pilots spoke of skies flashing with silent lightning, bolts of light that crawled across the horizon without thunder, illuminating the water below in unnatural hues. Sailors described phantom storms, walls of cloud that appeared in seconds, then dissolved as if someone had pulled a curtain away. And at the heart of these tempests, instruments died, compasses spun, and radios filled with voices that were not always their own. Radar operators logged echoes of ships that weren't there, planes that appeared and vanished on screens like ghosts trapped in the circuitry. Some called them phantom returns. Others whispered they were glimpses of something bleeding through from elsewhere. One Navy technician admitted under oath that he tracked a plane circling for nearly an hour, only for it to vanish the moment search crews arrived, as though the Triangle had staged an illusion to lure them in. Then there is the silence. Survivors of near misses speak of entering zones where sound itself seemed strangled, where the ocean was too quiet, the engines muted, even their own voices muffled in their throats. Time stretched in those silences. Minutes felt like hours. Clocks ticked too fast or too slow, and when the silence broke, they found themselves far off course, sometimes by hundreds of miles, as if reality had skipped. Scientists tried to explain it with talk of methane hydrates, magnetic anomalies, even freak weather patterns. But those who had been there shook their heads. This was not weather, it was something intentional. Some swore they felt watched, as if the ocean itself had eyes. Fishermen passed down stories of glowing orbs rising from the deep, hovering above the waves before vanishing into the clouds. Commercial pilots described tunnels of mist, corridors that seemed to open and close in the sky, pulling their planes forward like invisible currents. These reports were too consistent, too widespread, to dismiss as imagination. The Bermuda Triangle was not just a void where things were lost. It was active. It created illusions, bent instruments, swallowed sound, and rearranged time. It was less a place than a phenomenon, an intelligence, perhaps, hidden in the fabric of the sea and sky. The deeper you dive into the Bermuda Triangle, the more the line between science and legend dissolves. For some, the only explanation is that the Triangle is not natural at all, that it is not a storm of coincidence, but a system designed, engineered, and ancient. Divers whispered of structures on the seafloor that looked like walls, steps, and massive blocks, half buried in coral. Some believed these were remnants of Atlantis, the lost civilization said to vanish beneath the waves. If Atlantis ever existed, what better proof than an ocean zone where reality itself fractures? To them, the Triangle was not a curse, it was technology. Ruins still humming with power, still interfering with compasses and radios, still opening and closing invisible doors. Others pushed the theory further. If the Triangle behaved like a gateway, then perhaps it was never human to begin with. Could it be an ancient extraterrestrial installation, a cosmic lighthouse sending signals into the void? Some pilots swore that, in the moments before their radios died, they heard tones, patterns, or voices layered inside the static, intelligent, deliberate, waiting. What if those signals were not accidents of weather, but transmissions leaking from something operating beneath the sea? The US Navy dismissed these ideas in public, but in private, their actions told another story. Satellite sweeps focused on the Triangle far more often than on ordinary waters. Classified reports mentioned energy signatures inconsistent with weather activity when pressed. Officials refused to release raw data, citing national security. If the Triangle was just myth, why bury its numbers under secrecy? And yet the most disturbing theory is the one that combines them all. What if the Triangle is not one mystery, but many, layered across centuries? A natural fracture in the Earth's magnetic field, an ancient ruin amplifying that fracture, and something else, something watching, using the chaos as cover, a perfect camouflage for intelligence not bound by human maps. Atlantis, aliens, or both. The forbidden history of the Triangle suggests one truth. Flight 19 may not have stumbled into bad weather. They may have stumbled into design, a design older than history, and still alive beneath the waves. Asterisk. The room falls silent, as if we have stepped into the shadows where voices were meant to die out unheard. But fragments survive, whispered through hidden diaries, smuggled letters, and testimonies that were never supposed to see daylight. One survivor wrote of hearing chants at night, not of soldiers or officials, but of something older, something that felt less like words and more like vibrations seeping into bone. He claimed the walls of the underground chamber themselves pulsed in response, as if alive. His letter was intercepted, marked as psychotic rambling, and he was quietly, moved to an asylum where his file ended with the note, non-communicative. Another account comes from a nurse who treated those brought back from secret excavations. She described men with eyes so dilated they looked swallowed by darkness, trembling even in silence, unable to speak a coherent sentence. But when she leaned close, they mouthed one phrase over and over, "Not from here." Her testimony was confiscated after her sudden disappearance, and the official record lists her resignation as voluntary, though no trace of her ever appeared again. There are even recordings, faint crackling tapes where a trembling voice describes a council chamber beneath the ruins, adorned not with symbols of government but with spiral carvings that predate written history. The tape cuts off with a sound, not static, not human speech, but something layered, as if multiple frequencies collided and collapsed. Those who heard it firsthand warned others never to play it twice. Each of these accounts was branded delusion, suppressed, erased from official archives. Yet they converge on one forbidden theme: that what was unearthed was not simply political or technological, but a force that bent the human mind toward obedience, worship, and madness. Survivors called it a presence rather than an object, a consciousness that seeped into thought and rewrote identity itself. And maybe that is why their voices were buried deeper than any ruin. Why governments and institutions agreed silently across borders to brand them insane. Because if their testimonies are true, then the greatest danger was never the structures unearthed beneath history, but the possibility that those structures are still speaking, still waiting, still echoing through the cracks of forgotten testimonies that refuse to stay silent. Asterisk. The further you descend into this mystery, the more you realize that silence is never accidental. Behind closed doors, in windowless chambers humming with fluorescent light, men gathered to shape the narrative of Flight 19. They were not pilots, not searchers, not widows desperate for answers. They were officials, advisors, and shadowy overseers, each with their own stake in ensuring that the Bermuda Triangle remained nothing more than a story, not a scandal. Records show committees convened within days of the disappearance, documents marked confidential, then secret, then destroy after reading. Every page carried the weight of control. The reports we were allowed to see were sanitized, stripped of chaos, reduced to a neat box labeled navigation error, but other testimonies whispered a different tune. Distorted compasses, unknown lights, voices over the radio that spoke in phrases no one could identify. Those details never reached the press. They died in those hidden councils. Imagine the atmosphere in those rooms. Cigarette smoke curling, men leaning close across oak tables, voices low, pen strokes decisive. They did not debate what happened. They debated what the public could be permitted to believe. Some argued for caution, to suppress every strange report for fear it might unleash panic or weaken trust in the military. Others urged a careful leak to feed the public just enough mystery to keep them distracted, speculating endlessly about triangles and curses, while the deeper truths were locked away in vaults. This was not incompetence. This was choreography, a managed descent into ambiguity. Each official story, crafted like theater, performed to hide what could never be acknowledged. Families received letters with sympathetic words but no explanations. Pilots who spoke of the unexplainable were reassigned, their records scrubbed. Even the rescue plane's disappearance was folded into the same narrative blanket, a tragic accident, nothing more. But why then do certain memos reference unidentified craft in the same sector? Why do transcripts of the pilot's last words remain incomplete, with entire lines redacted? Here in Section 20, the stage is no longer the ocean or the storm. The stage is a boardroom, a council table, and at its center lies a truth too dangerous for daylight, a truth sealed with stamps and signatures, where silence itself becomes the ultimate weapon. Asterisk. Out on the Atlantic, the storm of rumor has always been louder than the storm of weather. By the time the official story of Flight 19 was sealed, another theory had already begun to breathe in the shadows: that these men were not lost at sea by accident, but swallowed in the middle of something far more deliberate. Whispers of experiments rippled through the archives like static, reports of radar anomalies that day, magnetic surges that seemed unnatural, and a chilling note from a maintenance crewman claiming the Avengers had been fitted with unfamiliar equipment just hours before takeoff. What kind of equipment? His report was buried. His signature struck out. Imagine it. 5 Navy bombers, supposedly practicing navigation drills. Yet their flight paths strayed into restricted zones where classified testing was rumored to take place. The Atlantic during the 1940s was more than open water. It was a laboratory. The Cold War was gestating technologies untested. Physics itself pushed to the edge of credibility. Could Flight 19 have been used as pawns in an experiment meant to probe new boundaries of time, space, or electromagnetic warfare? The silence around them begins to feel less like tragedy and more like orchestration. Some say the rescue plane's sudden disappearance is the strongest proof. What are the odds that 6 aircraft, launched hours apart, simply evaporate into nothing, unless the very phenomenon being tested engulfed them all? Declassified memos decades later revealed the Navy had in fact conducted classified magnetic navigation trials in the Atlantic. Though details remain blacked out, survivors never returned to confirm or deny. but certain fragments of unofficial testimony hint at invisible walls of energy, compasses spinning in directions no pilot could correct. In Section 21, the descent turns darker still. We no longer speak of storms or maps or human error. We speak of men being placed unknowingly into a crucible, where natural law may have been bent in pursuit of power. If that is true, then the Bermuda Triangle is not a curse of the sea. It is the scar of human ambition, a forbidden experiment written across the sky, and sealed forever by the silence of those who lived to erase it. By the silence of those who lived to erase it. The families of Flight 19 were told their husbands, sons, and brothers were gone, swallowed by the sea with no trace, no remains, not even a wing floating on the surface. Official letters delivered in stiff envelopes tried to seal the grief with bureaucratic words, but what those letters could not smother were the whispers that began in living rooms and kitchens. Late at night when the telephone rang or when envelopes arrived with no return address, some widows claimed they heard voices on the line, faint, crackling, distorted by static, but unmistakably the voices of their missing men. One wife described it as if the call came from a tunnel. Her husband's words urgent, then cut short. Another family received a letter in handwriting eerily like their son's, dated days after the Navy declared him lost. When they showed it to officials, the document vanished into evidence files that were never returned. Imagine the torment. To grieve, but never fully. To bury a memory that refuses to stay buried. Mothers reported dreams so vivid they woke, convinced their boys were alive, stranded somewhere beyond reach. Children whispered of seeing their fathers at the edge of their beds. Uniforms damp, eyes wide as if still fighting through the storm. Were these grief-born illusions? Or did something leak through a forbidden residue of men not entirely gone? Investigators later learned that certain radio frequencies remained jammed for weeks after the disappearance, as if signals kept pulsing out of nowhere. Amateur radio operators swore they picked up fragments of Flight 19 transmissions long after the Navy had shut the books. Even stranger, some of these calls contained coordinates that did not exist on any map, like voices trapped between worlds, unable to return yet unwilling to disappear. Section 22 plunges us not into military rooms or secret files, but into the raw human haunting of those left behind. For the families, the disappearance was not an ending. It was an open wound, festering with doubt, pain, and the terrifying possibility that their loved ones were caught in something so immense, so forbidden, that even death could not fully silence them. Asterisk, by the late 1940s, Flight 19 was no longer just a tragedy. It was an infection, seeping into culture, whispered in bars, splashed across newspapers, twisted into ghost stories told by sailors to wide-eyed recruits. The official record tried to bury the details under the bland phrase, "lost at sea," but the void created something more powerful, myth. And myths, once born, cannot be killed so easily. Writers seized on the strangeness. Magazines hinted at death zones in the Atlantic, where compasses spun and planes dissolved into thin air. Hollywood followed. Films painted the missing pilots as souls trapped between worlds, their voices echoing across storm-filled skies. Even respected journalists began to toy with the phrase that would forever alter the mystery, the Bermuda Triangle. Suddenly, Flight 19 was not just 5 lost planes. It was proof of a cursed region, a triangle where the rules of nature bent like reeds in the wind. But myths serve more than curiosity. They serve control. Officials could step back and watch the public tear itself apart, debating curses, aliens, or sea monsters. The truth, whatever it was, became buried beneath layers of speculation. And that speculation was useful. Each new book or documentary added distance between the people and the raw facts. By the 1960s, the missing Avengers were no longer a military embarrassment. They were folklore. Families of the lost men suffered doubly. First, in their grief. Then, in watching their loved one's disappearance turn into spectacle. Imagine being told, your husband's vanishing was not a tragedy but an entertainment, a ghost story to sell paperbacks. Imagine a child growing up hearing his father's name whispered not with honor but with dread, tied forever to a triangle that mocked closure. In Section 23, we see how Flight 19 slipped from history into legend, and in that transformation, the truth was further obscured. The cultural infection spread worldwide, until even those who might have known the facts could hide behind the excuse of myth. What better cover-up than to bury reality beneath a carnival of mystery? The deeper you look, the more you wonder if the Bermuda Triangle was never a natural riddle at all, but an invention, a smokescreen carefully fanned until it became unstoppable. Asterisk, asterisk, there is a moment, standing at the edge of this story, when you realize chance is no longer a satisfying answer. Too many coincidences, too many silences. In Section 24, we descend into the possibility that Flight 19 was not lost, not swallowed by storm or sea, but deliberately taken, not by myth, not by ocean magic, but by forces with intent. Some believe the planes were intercepted. Radar logs from that day contain anomalies, blips that moved too fast, vanished too suddenly, officially dismissed as weather interference. Yet technicians whispered of craft that did not match any known design. Could it be that Flight 19 stumbled into a test zone, intercepted by technology unknown to the pilots themselves? Or stranger still, were they escorted out of our world entirely, caught in the grip of something non-human watching the Atlantic from above? Survivor testimony never exists on record, but rumors speak of intercepted calls describing lights circling us and planes without wings. Redacted fragments hint at conversations abruptly ending, as though someone else cut the line. If those words were true, then what happened over the Atlantic was not an accident but an abduction, a removal so thorough it erased men, machines, and even the rescue crews sent to retrieve them. But why? Perhaps the answer lies in the timing. 1945 months after World War II ended. The dawn of the Cold War. A world bristling with new weapons, new experiments, and new secrets. Flight the 19th of May have carried not just pilots, but data, test equipment, codes, something that made them valuable enough to be taken rather than lost. And yet the darker whisper is not of governments or enemies but of watchers older and stranger. Legends from Caribbean sailors speak of sky traps, places where men vanish into invisible nets. Could the Bermuda Triangle itself be less a location than a mechanism? A mouth that opens when conditions align, devouring those who cross its path. Whatever the answer, Section 24 forces us to confront the most unsettling thought of all. If Flight 19 was taken, then they did not simply vanish. They are somewhere, perhaps alive for a time, perhaps silenced forever. But their disappearance was not blind fate. It was design, and the design has never been revealed. Asterisk, the end of this descent is not an answer, but a mirror. Nearly 80 years have passed since the 5 Avengers lifted into the Florida sky, never to return. Their names have faded from headlines, but their absence still hangs like static in the air. Flight 19 is not just a file in military archives. It is a wound carved into history, a wound that refuses to heal. For families, it was the silence that cut deepest. No bodies, no wreckage, no graves to visit. Just official words repeated like ritual, lost at sea, presumed dead. Yet every Christmas an empty chair remained, every birthday a memory that a father or brother should have lived to see. For researchers it became a labyrinth. Redacted pages, missing logs, evidence sealed by those who promised to protect truth yet only guarded their own power and for the world. Flight 19 became more than tragedy. It became a symbol, a forbidden doorway that whispers we are not in control, that the sky and sea hold secrets beyond maps, beyond reason. The Bermuda Triangle may be myth, but myths have teeth. They bite into the collective imagination. They gnaw at our confidence that science has solved everything. Each time another plane vanishes, each time a ship sends its last SOS and never docks, we feel the echo of those 5 bombers vanishing into dusk. Maybe it was weather, maybe it was human error, maybe it was a test gone wrong, a cover-up gone too deep, or a force beyond human comprehension. The truth remains locked in that twilight hour of December 1945, where voices crackled with fear, compasses spun wildly, and then silence fell. What makes Flight 19 endure is not what we know, but what we cannot prove. It is the suspicion that history is written not by truth, but by those skilled at burying it. It is the haunting idea that somewhere, in an archive or in another dimension, the story still plays out. Engines roaring, pilots shouting, skies alive with something we were never meant to see. Section 25 leaves us here, at the edge of the unknown, staring into the horizon where ocean meets sky, where fact dissolves into legend. Flight 19 remains suspended between them, a mystery, a warning, and a reminder that some secrets are too large, too dangerous, ever to be brought home. Too dangerous, ever to be brought home.